It used to be known as the New Zealand disease. We've made huge progress in the last 75 years, but drownings still happen far too often.
The country's drowning toll has hit a bleak milestone.
A recent spate of drownings across the country has prompted an urgent warning from safety officials.
The death toll on our waterways has risen again. 2 more deaths were confirmed today.
A dramatic water rescue unfolding in the Coromandel.
72 people drowned in New Zealand last year, most of them males, most of them older, many of them in the elements, either the ocean or rivers. But it's the deaths of much younger swimmers who are a lot closer to home that has caught the attention of a top New Zealand coroner.
Every year, hundreds of families are faced with the prospect of finding their child floating in a backyard swimming pool.
A coroner says adults must directly supervise young children after 8 drowning deaths of children aged 5 and under in one summer.
The coroner is recommending adults hold or be within arm's reach of young children near the water.
That's the real tragedy here. These are situations that are avoidable, but safety for kids around water is up to adults. It's up to the rest of us.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and on The Detail today, saving our children from drowning and what parents need to be doing or, crucially, not doing while their young ones swim. How the rise of cheap temporary pools is dragging us back to the bad old days of the 1980s, and why our ever-present cell phones play a part in this issue. This is the stark warning from a top New Zealand coroner.
He says adults shouldn't be online, doing domestic tasks or talking to others while supervising.
It was the drownings of 8 children aged under 6 in one summer that prompted the investigation and recommendations by coroner Michael Robb. The children, aged from just 9 months to 5 years, died in private paddling pools, above-ground pools, a public pool, a lake, river and at a beach during the 3-month summer of 2021 and 22. That's a few years ago, but the recommendations have only just been released.
It's an absolute tragedy. I think it's easy to think sometimes when you hear numbers, it's easy to focus on the number and not actually connect with the fact these are some of our most vulnerable New Zealanders. And to lose 8 of them in a range of situations to drowning in one summer is a huge loss and a massive tragedy.
That's Water Safety New Zealand General Manager Gavin Walker. He's welcomed the coroner's recommendations, which highlight 3 major issues, starting with adults and caregivers closely supervising young children near the water at all times.
The coroner also wants signs in public places to be clear and blunt about supervision requirements. He recommends a process or legislation to ensure inflatable pools are only sold with a gated entry.
Here's Gavin on his reaction to those recommendations.
Relieved. So we're in a really privileged position in New Zealand at Water Safety New Zealand. So we're a small charity with 75 years worth of history focusing on this issue of drowning. So 75 years ago, drowning was such a challenge in the New Zealand context. It was often known as the New Zealand disease. And we've been battling away for 75 years to raise awareness of the things that Kiwis need to do better to get system changes in key systems and changes in approach so we can reduce that. And we've made huge inroads, but it's still a stubborn challenge in New Zealand where we lose on average 82 New Zealanders a year. So relief that the coroner heard the things that we were saying and others were saying, and that the coroner's calling for change and action in a few key areas. And we're now determined to drive that action to fruition so we can reduce the risk.
Now, parental supervision, this is a big one. It's crucial, but for whatever reason, it's lacking. Why? What's happening here?
A whole range of reasons, but I think that the trap, having been through similar situations with our own kids, parents get busy, but I think the challenge for us all to remember when we're looking after kids around any water, we are the ones that keep them safe. These young kids can't keep themselves safe around water. They tend to wander off and get distracted. And so the really clear message in the 8 tragedies that the coroner's released here is for parents and supervisors to expect the unexpected, to maintain close contact around water. So we're not just talking about supervision and keeping an eye on what's going on. Perhaps that's the trap for us. We're talking about staying close by, preferably an arm's length. If your kids are in the water, get in the water with them, because if something happens, it's likely to happen really quickly, and you need to be there to respond to keep them safe.
The role of cell phones, how detrimental is that nowadays?
Well, it's an added complication because it's just another distraction. And the distractions and other things going on in your lives are what gets in the way of parents actually maintaining that close supervision and contact. So anytime you're around water, even if it's at a council pool and the like, and there are lifeguards around, lifeguards aren't babysitters for your kids. They're there to help out if and when things happen, but the fundamental responsibility for young kids is for parents to be in the water with them and keeping them safe. Don't be fooled if, as your kids grow up a bit and think they can cope with all those situations. We all have a responsibility to show more interest than perhaps we do at certain times.
Do you think, Gavin, there should be, say, mandatory water safety training for parents because we are a country surrounded by water?
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. There are some great programs out there that encourage and show parents ways to introduce their kids to the water, but I think it's really simple. A parent's responsibility, fundamentally, parents and caregivers' responsibilities to help keep their kids safe. Just stay close. Don't be scared of the water. Introduce your kids to the water. Teach them about it. Teach them to love water, but do that close at hand. It's not as complicated as we think.
Do you think, Evan, that there should be stricter legal consequences for parents or caregivers who leave their children unsupervised near water?
I'm probably not best placed to talk to that, actually. I think no parent sets out to put their kids at risk, but I think we all need to remember that drowning incidents can happen really quickly. They can be really quiet. A kid can fall into water and you're not going to have a whole lot of splashing and noise that goes with that. And so I think we just have to take a deep breath and remember it's about doing some simple things well.
One simple tip, teach your kids to float. Gavin says this is crucial.
Make like a mushroom, put your arms around your knees. Squeeze real tight and you'll float with ease.
The mushroom is a simple technique that allows kids to float in the water.
The challenge in New Zealand is you don't need to be a great swimmer to be safe in water, but you need to be able to float. And it sounds like a really simple thing, but we see the results for 100,000 primary-age kids a year, and it's telling us that only 1/3 of our 10-year-olds out there in New Zealand today can keep themselves afloat for up to 3 minutes. When we're simulating splashing them, we're getting other kids in the class to splash them and make a bit of noise. Only 1/3 of our kids can do those basics really well. And so I think there are some traps for parents here that their kids are probably not as capable in the water as you think. The education system still does a great job on some basic aquatics. And we're advocating for changes to be made in the upcoming review of the health and PE curriculum to make sure that the role of schools is to ensure that kids understand safe decision-making around water and can do some basic survival skills well. It's unrealistic to think that our schools have the time, energy and know-how nowadays to then go on and ensure all kids can swim competently in a range of strokes. Those are decisions that parents can make off the back of that, but our schools can still perform a great job ensuring kids are safe around water and doing the right things.
About 60% of schools in New Zealand, that's about 1,300 schools, have pools, but over the past decade or so, more than 300 have closed or faced closure.
A Decile 1 Auckland school says it's been 2 years since it received Ministry of Education funding to maintain its school pool, and it's now really struggling to keep the facility open.
There's still a large number of schools with their own pools. I think from time to time there's a lot of media attention on this issue around school pools, We don't think that's the problem. Because there's plenty of schools without their own pools with great water survival programs for their kids and doing the right thing. They walk them to the local council pool or they share pools with other schools. That's not really the issue. It's, are we spending time and energy making sure kids understand the things that are going to keep them safe around water, practicing how to float, practicing how to get in and out of different water environments safely, teaching kids when to jump in the water and when not to, and what to do when things go wrong. It really is about focusing on those basics and doing them really well. And parents have a huge role to play here. When you take your kids to the beach and you're having fun at the beach, turn it into a game and try and get your kids to float in the surf, see how they react, teach them the right sort of behaviours. You might well be surprised and learn a whole lot of things about how your kids respond in those situations.
Are we wrapping our kids up too much in cotton wool? Is this part of the problem? Have the kids lost confidence in the water?
There are definitely some kids out there that struggle with being comfortable in the water, but that's probably always been the case. There's a lot going on in people's lives, and I think we make a lot of assumptions today as modern parents. And one of those assumptions might be, I've seen my child in and around water and they seem to be making good decisions. I think we just need to test those assumptions, actually throw them into a few situations. Don't actually throw them into situations. Create some fun activities, do some things as families and see what their real level of capability is, and then make good decisions based off that. If learn to swim programs are the right thing for your family and you can afford to do that, go and do it. If you can't, there's still value in you as a parent taking responsibility for those things yourself. There's pretty clear evidence in New Zealand, though, that our young children remain at risk of drowning, but they're actually getting better and better over time at making risk assessments and keeping them safe in the water.
Now, this podcast concentrates on child deaths because of that recent coroner's report, but ironically, it's an older age group that seems to be struggling with risk assessment.
The problem that we really have in New Zealand is older New Zealanders taking a few shortcuts and doing things like having life jackets on board boats but not wearing them, going in the water by themselves and not thinking, what happens if something happens to me? The growing issue in New Zealand is different to almost every other country in the world. It's actually people, predominantly males, 50 years and older, assuming it won't happen to them and then not being able to cope when something bad happens. Our kids are actually better at judging risk than they have been in the past.
New Zealand is, of course, a country surrounded by water with 15,000 kilometres of coastline, more than 425,000 k's of rivers and streams, and about 4,000 lakes. And let's face it, Kiwis love a backyard pool. About 40,000 homes have a consented one, but it's the rise in popularity of the portable pool that is proving problematic.
Water Safety New Zealand is calling for the sale of small portable pools to be banned. It agrees with the coroner after an investigation into child drownings that temporary pools 1.2 metres and higher need to have a gated entry.
Gaining popularity, they've been popping up in Kiwis' backyards. The coroner's recommended portable pools 1.2 metres or higher should only be sold with an appropriate safety gated entry.
What's your thought on this? I mean, just how problematic are these pools, Gavin?
Well, it's a really interesting situation. So we worked, New Zealand made the bold decision in the 80s and 90s that all pools should be fenced. And as a result of that bold decision, we massively reduced child drowning risk. Most children back in the 80s and 90s that drowned in pools that were unfenced, and we fixed that problem. And in the recent years, what we've seen is the growth in availability of portable and temporary pools at increasingly cheaper prices. So you can buy, instead of spending a significant amount of money putting a pool in your backyard, a permanent pool, you can now buy a reasonably good temporary pool for a few $100 that will last you a few seasons. The legislation in New Zealand was written at a time when we didn't have all these temporary pools. We had small toddler paddling pools, and we're kind of shin deep. We're filled up by parents, used by kids and emptied straight afterwards. But this new phenomenon of temporary pools is really interesting. And what we're saying is this is creating the potential for us to go back to where we were in the 80s and 90s, where 9 kids a year drowned in pools in the home, because most of these temporary pools, it seems unlikely that the majority of these temporary pools are being fenced. If you buy a pool for a few $100s, what's the likelihood that you're spending several $1,000s fencing that properly in a way that keeps kids away? So that's the risk that we flagged with the coroner. And the coroner said, actually, the system needs to improve. And if it can't improve, why are we selling these things in New Zealand?
Ideally, Water Safety would like to see them banned if they're under 1.2 metres high. But how difficult would that be?
I'm definitely not best placed to say how we're going to enforce that. But this is not an unusual thing for us around child safety. Our government prevents the sale of things like kids' clothing and pyjamas made out of particularly flammable materials. They actually monitor what comes into the country. When they find examples of companies importing this kind of material that puts kids at risk, they require the seller to stop selling it at their expense. So this is not an unusual thing around kids' safety. I think there are plenty of products that aren't for sale in New Zealand for good reasons, because they're not worth the risk.
Auckland Council says it's important buyers read the warning signs on portable pool boxes or online and ensure they're compliant with the building code.
We check pop-up pools all the time. We get a lot of customers, concerned residents in the area who will ring up and say there's a pop-up pool just come about, and they're concerned about the safety of the children.
For those who've already got these pools, what's your advice?
Our advice is pretty simple with these pools. Don't just think of the great fun that your kids are going to have in that, because there's no doubt parents are buying these things for the right reasons. But think about what if. What if another child got onto our property when we weren't around and came upon the school? What might happen? What if, when I'm busy doing something else, my own children end up getting access to the pool? Kind of think through that consequence. So it's pretty simple advice here. If you've got an existing pool, fence it or empty it.
And I understand one of the 8 who died over that tragic summer, that involved a portable pool, is that correct?
It did, and tragically we've lost 5 young children under 5 in the last decade in portable pools in people's backyards. And this wasn't a thing until the last decade or so. We didn't have kids drowning in these pools because they didn't exist. Our concern is that this is a problem that's only going to grow, and we can see what's going to happen, so let's act now before young New Zealanders pay the price.
In Canterbury, one public swimming pool is now starting to use artificial intelligence technology to reduce the risk of drownings. The new drowning prevention system at Selwyn Aquatic Centre will use 27 cameras to track and analyse swimmer movements, alerting lifeguards to possible signs of a swimmer in trouble.
I think we'll find technology like AI increasingly being used in a range of situations around water to kind of support other interventions. It's great. It's great to see councils looking at opportunities to do better. Principally, they are doing that to support their lifeguards. The role of a lifeguard's really challenging when you've got a busy pool in front of you with tens of people and kids doing different things. That AI is there to give them a helping hand. I think the challenge for the rest of us is to not assume that equates to safety. The best form of safety is you being in there with your kids, teaching them to enjoy the water and helping them to overcome anything that goes wrong.
We all know that kids under 5 move fast. You turn your back for a second and they're gone. That's why when my child is in the water, I'm in the water. Constant supervision saves lives.
Could a sort of a nationwide public awareness campaign, I'm talking sort of TV ads, social media campaigns, etc., be effective in changing behaviour, especially for parents and, making sure that they are supervising their kids properly?
Certainly around this issue of supervision and what supervision looks and feels like, it perhaps trivialises the issue to call it supervision. What we're actually talking about is parents being aware of the risk around any water and maintaining close contact. There's no doubt that improved education campaigns need to be part of our future action, and that's an area that we'll be working with a range of partners to examine.
If you do get into trouble in the water, what is the best thing to do?
The best thing to do is to relax, to lie back and float, and to calm yourself down and buy yourself enough time to then call for help and wait for others to be able to get to you. So that simple action of calming yourself down, which is a really challenging thing to do in a situation where all of a sudden you go from being happy and having fun to being scared and out of control, it's the one significant thing that we can all do well and all do better to improve our chance of survival.
Have a go, but get it slow.
Whether you're at the beach or at the pool, it pays to get into the water nice and slow.
We're not there to discourage people from going in the water. We love the fact that New Zealanders are highly connected to the water. It's the place we go to get food. It's the place we go to have fun with friends and family. It's the place we go to rejuvenate, and we just want that to happen in a way that doesn't cost 82 of us a year our lives.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Gavin Walker. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Phil Benj. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.